As markets learn to manufacture intelligence, politics modernizes, upgrades paranoia, and tries to get a grip. What's going on, everybody? A while back, I was doing a sentence by sentence analysis of Nick Land's famous essay, Meltdown, personal favorite of mine. And I got held up. It's been a while. I had a couple kids, forgive me, but I've been meaning to resume forever. I've received multiple emails or messages over the past year asking me when will I resume this project. So I appreciate the interest, and here we go. The sentence that we have to cover next is sentence number 3. Quote, as markets learn to manufacture intelligence, politics modernizes, upgrades paranoia, and tries to get a grip. What does it mean to say that markets manufacture intelligence? This is actually really important if you're interested in any of this stuff. This is a claim that you see either explicitly or implicitly throughout Nick Land's work, especially today with the age of AI acceleration. This really takes on a lot of importance. The locus classicus for this view, in my opinion, and probably in Nick Land's mind, it's really Hayek's 1945 piece, The Use of Knowledge in Society, where he really lays out that markets are really best understood as information synthesizing intelligence machines. He makes the point in that essay that what a market really is this kind of abstract aggregator of partial local information. It's not just an abstract metaphor to say that markets manufacture intelligence. Markets are literally intelligent, and they're literally more intelligent than we are for technically specifiable reasons. Every time you go and buy something, you're doing an analysis of your local conditions, essentially. You're thinking, what do I want? What do I desire? What do I need? And how much is it worth? You're comparing that possible purchase to many other purchases you could be making. You only have so much money. And in that decision to buy or sell that thing at that price is encoded both the information that you bring to the table and also that the information that the seller or the buyer, whoever your counterparty is, brings to the table. The dollar amount is this universal denominator. Of course, it can be different currencies or whatever, then the global markets will, the currency markets will aggregate that as well and make all of these things comparable. You could not do a centralized analysis of what everything in the world is worth. There's probably not a supercomputer that could do that. Now, interestingly, there are debates about this.
Hey everybody, real quick, I finally finished writing my latest book, The Independent Scholar, and it's the best thing I've written, the most important thing I've written, because it compiles everything I've learned over the past 5 years, figuring out this new lifestyle/business model of mine, working full-time as an independent scholar outside of institutions and on the internet. Since I left academia 5 years ago, I've been experimenting like crazy, testing all different kinds of things. I've done books and courses and subscriptions, and I've tried it all. I've tested every model, and I've learned so much. I've made so many mistakes, but I've also done things well, and I've earned a few $100,000 doing all these different things. Now I've really got the model down, the ideal model. I've narrowed it down to what works the best and what's most reproducible for most people. It's just a super practical, focused book, what works and what doesn't work in the most concise and practical format possible. So buy it, order it now online at otherlife.co/scholar. You can also just search for The Independent Scholar book. Maybe add Justin Murphy in there if you want to find it more easily. Otherlife.co/scholar. Go buy it, The Independent Scholar, the ideal model. Everything I've learned over the past 5 years working full-time as an independent scholar. Thank you. I'm very proud of it. Otherlife.co/scholar.
There's actually a surprisingly interesting and intelligent socialistic response to some of this. You're probably familiar with the famous stories from like the 1970s, the Chilean government's effort to build a cybernetic communist calculation machines. It's a fascinating and rich history. I do think that ultimately what we find in history and also theoretically is that only markets can synthesize intelligence in this truly dynamic way, because once you have the calculation, let's say, of the hypothetical communist computer, people are going to go trade on it. It's a constantly dynamic system that never sits still long enough for one centralized machine to have the final say. Markets are living in time at all times. Markets are updating 24/7, especially today with our kind of digitalized markets and so forth. So even if you had a super sophisticated socialist computer, as soon as it has its final tally of the proper price and value of all things, people could go exploit it, and then you'd have markets. The market is the final outside entity that abstracts and aggregates all intelligence. Another angle is a famous text by the Austrian economist Ludwig von Mises. It's often called the calculation argument. And he basically makes the same argument earlier. This was in 1920, I think. And Mises basically tries to prove that you can't compute socialist economic planning policies. Hayek is building on this. That's what I think Land is talking about. This is the kind of intellectual tradition that he's drawing on when he says this idea that markets manufacture intelligence. Markets manufacture intelligence in the sense that they start to tell us what to do, right? Take a lot of our orders from markets. And if you're a capitalist, maybe you say this is a good thing. It's telling us how to be productive. If you're more of a leftist, then you think that this is actually a very dehumanizing and terrifying thing, that we get our marching orders for what to do in life from this kind of inhumane, abstract intelligence that we can hardly really understand or decode or let alone control. Think about how you organize your life. You do planning for your family. You think about what career to go into, what business to start. You're basically taking orders from this super intelligent machine. That's what it means that markets are smarter than you. When you build a business, you have to analyze the market first. The market is smarter than you are. And if you don't defer to its superior intelligence, then you're going to lose. So that's what all this means. This is not abstract philosophizing. It's technically true that markets manufacture intelligence. It's actually hard to deny this. Now, AI is very interesting. I think we'll return to the AI question at the end of this lecture. I think it would be worthwhile to explore one historical example to understand how radical this is. In many ways, we've normalized it, but historically, markets took a lot of time and history and political developments for us to have such liquid, universal, globalized markets. That's not natural necessarily. It's very rewarding to look at when this stuff first pokes its head through. It really shows you what it means for markets to manufacture intelligence. If you look at some of the earliest stock markets, for instance, it was in Amsterdam, actually, that the Dutch East India Company was basically divided into stock shares and it traded on an open market. Now, my understanding, I'm not sure if it's the first stock market ever. It's one of the earliest examples of equity shares of a company trading on an open public market in 1602. The Dutch East India Company was trading on the Amsterdam Stock Exchange. When this first happened, the prices of the stock would move on a daily basis based on rumors and whatever information is coming off the Cape or whatever, the spice yields in Java, news reports about where the Spanish fleet was located, reports from European diplomacy efforts. These things would move the price of VOC shares. People were using the share price as a kind of news. It told you what was happening with this Dutch East India Company venture. You saw very interesting patterns at this time. Stockbrokers would race each other. Their couriers would be competing to go faster than others. It's similar to how today we have high frequency trading shops that exploit physical proximity to Wall Street to get information 1 millisecond before some other firm. That's a vector of capitalist competition, which is essentially about manufacturing intelligence. It's about who can get the knowledge first and then exploit that knowledge, bet on that knowledge in some way. By doing so, updating the market about that information. Every time one trader does something like that, it broadcasts a signal to everyone else in the world. That's what the market is. It's this web that lets any individual player exploit a new piece of information, get paid to do. In that exploitation, the whole market gets updated in terms of knowledge, in terms of intelligence. This is what you saw at the time of the Dutch East India Company. When its stock was first trading, stockbrokers would keep telescopes on the Cape, this spot returning ships. Whoever saw the ship returning first, that's alpha. And they wanted to know that. So they would invest in doing that. This was interesting to think about happening in society. It's the first proof that people get that this market thing, this idea of splitting a company into shares and letting people buy and sell it, it's not just a financial operation. It is this kind of profound and dramatic new type of social intelligence generation, essentially. And now, obviously, we've normalized all of this. And we have markets in all kinds of things. Because markets are so ubiquitous, we're numb to them a little bit. We fail to see how radical and interesting they are as essentially intelligence manufacturing systems. Markets learn to manufacture intelligence. Politics modernizes, upgrades paranoia, and tries to get a grip. So what's he saying here? Politics has to reckon with what it means for there to be these kind of decentralized intelligence devices, these abstract machines, if you will. What does a government do in response to this? What does a monarch do in response to this? Whoever is representative of status quo powers, how does one navigate this if you represent a kind of controlling elite of any kind? Obviously, it's threatening. Obviously, it's destabilizing, because what it means is that there's now information markets that are outside of your control. You see this as well in the history. One implication of this sentence is that politics is reactive, that political modernism is reactive to markets, and the political economy tends to actually see it the other way around. The politics had to lay the ground for markets. Various governments had to lay certain institutions down for markets to be possible. Nick Land's contention here is the opposite. It's that as markets learn to manufacture intelligence, that's actually the engine for a lot of what we call political modernism. And I think this checks out. For instance, James C. Scott's famous book, Seeing Like a State, his argument famously is that modern governments try to impose grids of intelligibility on the chaotic contents of their population, whether it's the timber forests or the behaviors of citizens. The modern state is always trying to create some kind of standardized regime or classification system, some lens and some way of thinking about its population and its processes that allows it to standardize things, that allows it to apply some kind of consistent theoretical logic to the disparate phenomena within the regime's purview. One of the examples, aside from the timber programs that he talks about, is Soviet collectivization. You can think of the Soviet revolution, reactive political modernism, trying to keep up with runaway train of markets and intelligence. People like Lenin see capitalism developing. They see things like electricity taking shape, technological and market-driven dynamics. The intrinsically conservative-leaning Russian soul looks at this and they realize, like, the whole world is going away. The whole past world is going away. Everything traditional is going to be destroyed. Marx was right about this. People like Lenin come up with their schemes. Stalin was famously paranoid, one of the most famously paranoid agents in all of human history. And then, of course, there's the American paranoia. Richard Hofstadter wrote a very famous book on the paranoid style in American politics. And the Cold War paranoia gets escalated throughout the modern period. I think it is interesting to see this as a effect of markets and intelligence, and more or less technology being a symbol of markets and intelligence. That's one of the more general points that's interesting and provocative about this essay and about this sentence. The implicit argument that political modernism is actually downstream of technological change, and specifically this market-driven synthetic intelligence process escapes its box in the modern period. All of politics after that is a kind of paranoid attempt to create control, to retain power, to manage it. And one of the reasons why it gets so ugly and also so confusing is that politics is always a few steps behind. It's like politics can never, it's just structurally doomed. It's like never quite able to get up to speed, but it's always trying. It always wants to justify itself and sustain itself, but it's also constantly failing to. And I think that this is what's evoked in that final part of the sentence where he says, and tries to get a grip. As markets learn to manufacture intelligence, politics modernizes, upgrades paranoia, and tries to get a grip. This really, I think, highlights how it's a constantly doomed joke, trying to get a grip. It's like the guy who's always falling behind and constantly trying to get up to speed, but just never can. He's trying to get a grip, but failing. It's about control. It's about trying to find ways to defend one's prerogatives, one's powers, one's control over a increasingly dynamic and out of control system that is more intelligent than you are, and requires you, in order to justify and defend your power, to take on increasingly doomed and possibly even evil and dubious, desperate measures. I just want to close this by saying that I want to talk a little bit about AI because it's related in interesting ways. We now have this prospect of machines which can actually compute much better than us. Already, as of today, the latest OpenAI model, the O3 model, is pretty remarkable, even compared to all previous ones. You can ask it about anything, global issues, and it will give you surprisingly complete, objective, and accurate computations of increasingly complicated sets of data. And anyone paying attention to AI knows that this stuff is real, it's accelerating, and it's changing what it means to understand things. As we are living through a revolution in what it means for us to understand the world, our ability to compute things is increasing dramatically with these tools. But it also points to this fact that these tools themselves are intelligent than us. There's much one can say about this, and I'm going to cut myself off because I took some liberties today and went wild on a few topics. I want to leave you with one quote from a different Nick Land piece, which I think is just a nice way to close up this conversation. This is a snippet from his essay called Machinic Desire. He's very much talking about a similar idea. It's an excellent passage and it's quite evocative, and he's talking about the same thing we've talked about today. He says, pods, spelled PODS, all caps, politically organized defensive systems. Modeled upon the polis, pods hierarchically delegate authority through public institutions, family, and self, seeking metaphorical sustenance in the corpuscular fortifications of organisms and cells. The global human security allergy to cyber revolution consolidates itself in the New World Order, or consummate macropod, inheriting all the resources of repression as concrete collective history. The macropod has one law. The outside must pass by way of the inside. What I find so interesting about this snippet is how much of it is actually playing out right now in a grand drama that is quite related to AI safety and contemporary political establishments. Even very smart people like Peter Thiel have talked about this. One of the key threats at this moment in history is forces that present themselves as representatives of safety, gaining too much power at a global level, and then one day we wake up and find ourselves under the thumb of one centralized global power that we'll not be able to defend ourselves against. AI safety is interesting in this regard because OpenAI, which kind of got an early lead in the AI race, started lobbying the government. You have AI safety theorists saying we need to put a pause on all of this. We need political control on AI because it's getting so smart. When the manufacturing of intelligence reaches a certain level, people will say we have to control this. It's too dangerous. We need governments to lock this down. But implicitly, over any such claim, there's implicitly going to be a ruler. There's some government, and then inside the government, there's particular groups. As soon as you start trying to control intelligence, you are entering into a kind of arms race representing the side that must ultimately end in a kind of one world government. That if it's just deducible from the fact that intelligence escalates, it keeps escalating, and you believe it's necessary and good to control it, then you're locked into that escalation on your side as well. It ultimately locks you into a position of one world government. Frankly, a lot of people are actually quite comfortable with this. You're seeing this. People like Yudkowsky and some of the other more aggressive AI safety people will say, yeah, we should just have an international organization that is able to lock down AI models around the world and give them full authority to do this because it's an emergency. And if we don't do it, we're all going to die. People are now publicly calling for it, and they're very smart people. You also see people like Jeffrey Hinton who represent the more socialistic interpretation of AI, where this is going to put everyone out of work. We need to have global socialism or humanity is going to be screwed. So you see this playing out. And this is what Land is talking about in both this essay and in this snippet from Machinic Desire that I talked about just a moment ago. This is what he's talking about. The escalation of intelligence is always challenging political control systems that set themselves up as security systems against this invasion of outside alien intelligence. One of the key principles of the human security system is that the outside must pass by way of the inside. In other words, the people with control must have the final authority over what stuff on the outside must pass by way of the inside. In other words, you can be an outsider, you can be creative out on the market, you can be an entrepreneur, but ultimately, at a certain point of growth or development, when you get powerful or significant enough, you're going to have to bend the knee to us. You can go on the outside, but you're going to have to pass by way of the inside. We're going to have to integrate you and domesticate you. That's what we're seeing. I hope you found this useful or interesting. Subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the podcast, give me a message. Love to hear what you think. All right. I'll see you next time.